Every server, including local environments and live hosting servers on the internet, works a little bit differently. And so this is an example of how WordPress could be installed manually using Local by Flywheel. Coming up in this chapter, I'll show you how I installed WordPress manually using another local environment called MAMP, but you should follow along in whichever environment you have. You can refer back to this video later or follow along now. And in doing this, you'll get a feel for how WordPress works and the way it connects the core files to the database. Let's go. Now, I'm going to create a new WordPress installation in Local by Flywheel, and I suggest you do the same. So I'm going to go ahead and log out of my practice site 1, close the tabs, and I'm going to close that tab as well in my browser. And I'm going to go back to Local by Flywheel, and just so that I don't work on this site instead, I'm going to turn this site off. So Practice Site 1 is now turned off. And I have a second one called Practice Site 2 that I've just installed using the plus button over here. And I did a very default installation with no changes at all. And I called it Practice Site 2. So stop the video if you like and hit the plus sign and set up a second site that we're going to do a manual installation on, or you can just follow along here. The reason I use Local by Flywheel to create the installation first and then go ahead and change it so that I can use that environment to install WordPress manually is because it's just convenient. Local by Flywheel sets up the config file so that it's already connected to the database. That way, when we install WordPress manually, we know that all the credentials are correct. Now, let's first take a look at the file structure for this Practice Site 2. I'm going to open File Explorer again, and I'll go back to my local sites folder in my username under Users on the main hard drive. And I'll find Practice Site 2, and under the App folder and the Public folder, you can see that these are the files that are the WordPress core files. And like I mentioned in the last video, if we go to wordpress.org and we download this zip file and then unzip it, these are the exact files that we'll end up with from that zip file, with the exception of the wp-config file that was created from the sample. Let's open the wp-config-sample.php file in a text or a code editor. Now I have it open in my Atom code editor right here, and you can see that it's just got some default data for the database name and the username and the password and what the host name is, which by default might be localhost. Now compare that to if I go back into the file structure and I open that wp-config.php file. This file has been created by WordPress when Local by Flywheel installed it. So you can see the difference. The database name is local, and the username is root, the password is root, and the host name is localhost. And also, there are some salts or unique keys and phrases down here that we will set up in a later video when we do a manual installation in the next section. That's just to show you what you would get if you downloaded WordPress from wordpress.org. Instead of just downloading this and replacing it inside of my file structure, I'm just going to make the assumption that this is the file, these are the same files, and the wp-config.php file is already set up for this server. However, the main change that we're going to make so that we can go through the WordPress installation process, that manual installation process, is that we're going to delete the database tables out of that database. As we did in the last video, click the Database tab here and click Adminer for this website. Now you can make sure you're in the right website up in the address bar of your browser. This one is my practice site 2.local. And so I know I'm in the right database. And what I'm going to do is look at all these database tables. There's 12 in total. And I'm going to click the checkbox at the top left, which selects all those database tables. And then after that, I'm going to come down here and click drop. When I click drop, it gives me a window that says, are you sure? Because this is going to delete all the tables out of the database, but it's going to leave the database intact. We're just erasing an existing database. So I'll hit OK. And now the message in Adminer tells me, okay, well, in this database, there are no tables. So how are we going to get the tables back and get this working? If I go right now to local by Flywheel with the empty database, and I click, say, View Site, when I click View Site, here we go. Now, the WordPress files are in place, and the WordPress WP config file is correct. It's actually communicating with the database correctly. The reason I know that is because this is the first step of setting up WordPress manually. So now I'm going to go through this process, which is a script they used to call the famous 5-minute WordPress install process. Now, so many hosts and local environments install WordPress automatically that you may not have to go through this process very often. But choose your language and click Continue. And now, since we're already connected to the database, it just needs a little bit of information about what the WordPress site is going to entail. It's going to create the first user, and we'll choose our password as well. And this is the welcome message. Welcome to the famous 5-minute WordPress installation process. And so, let's see. I'm going to call this practice site 2 so I can know which one it is. I'll use my standard username. And then I'm going to choose a password that I know I'll be able to remember. It doesn't have to be that difficult or that strong of a password, since this isn't a public-facing website. Nobody can access this on the web. And then there needs to be an email address. For each user account. And then you can choose discourage search engine visibility. If you are on a live server, you might do that in order to develop the site or hide it behind a maintenance screen. In either case, you don't need to check that box. And I'll click Install WordPress. And I can save that username and password again. And that was it. Success. WordPress has been installed. So I can click the Login button, which brings me to that standard login page. Log in with the username and password that I had the browser remember. And here we are, practice site 2. And I can right-click Visit Site and open that in a new tab. And I have my standard, default, fresh and clean WordPress installation ready to go. Now let's take a look at the database that's still open. And let's just refresh the page. And you can see that all the database tables are back. Let's just verify under WP Options, and I'll hit Select Data. Yeah, there's the URL, practicesite2.local, the same URL that I have up here. And so that worked for me. The quick WordPress 5-minute installation process, and that's how we do it. In the next sections, you'll see that I teach you how to install WordPress manually using the MAMP local development environment. And I've added this local by Flywheel system in ahead of that because I find that it's much easier and it loads and works faster on my browser than MAMP does. But follow along if you like. You can continue to use local by Flywheel instead of MAMP. And in the next sections, take what you need out of the video lessons. In this lesson, I showed you how you can use local by Flywheel to experiment with installing WordPress manually. It's a good exercise just to get familiar with how WordPress works to connect the files to the database. In the future, you can feel free to rely on auto installers in local or at your hosting company to install WordPress automatically. In the next video, we'll explore different types of hosting environments for WordPress, including another local development environment called MAMP. If Local by Flywheel is working well for you, feel free to just follow along with the MAMP lessons, but keep using local instead.